All right. Got a lot of you guys jumping in and joining us today. Thank you so much. Looks up to 263 still going. Wow, my goodness. A lot of folks calling in, a lot of folks joining. This is obviously a very, very important topic. And rather than wait around, we are just going to get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Joshua Pruitt. I am the Director of Partnerships and Strategic Initiatives here at Aloft. Been in the industry a little over a decade now, focused on public safety, but just love everything UAS. I'll kick it over to Mr. Dave Messina to introduce himself.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Messina. I'm the president and CEO of FPV Freedom Coalition. We formed in 2019. We've been particularly active in governmental affairs as well as safety. Our focus is recreational UAS pilots. We've been on a dozen AC and DAC meetings. I'm a member of the ASTM, a Remote ID Working Group, the drone safety team, which FAA and industry. And my team's been very involved in immersing ourselves in this NPRM for BVLOS.
Thanks, Dave. John, we'll hand the reins over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Joshua. Thanks, David, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is John Hegranes. I'm the founder and CEO of Aloft. Just to go back a little bit, at Aloft, our mission has always been simple but ambitious to enable flight. That's when we started 10 years ago. That was our mission, and it's true today. And particularly with this NPRM, we want to really have a combination of our comments, but also inform you so that you can make your comments. And we represent one of the largest drone networks in the United States. We have a ton of recreational users, commercial users, delivery, enterprise, public safety, you name it, all with one goal in mind. How do we make safe, compliant, scalable flight a reality for everybody? And that's why we're here today. The FAA's proposed Part 108, Part 146 rules are not just another layer of regulation. They're really looking to define the future of BVLOS and really the future of aviation. So this is a long NPRM. There's a ton in it. We're going to dive into some of the things that we care about the most in this. And we've been vocal. We've been a part of the BVLOS ARC. That's 3 years ago now. Hard to believe. Dave Messina was a part of that with me as well. So we're looking to bring in a lot of that experience, that background for what we're here today. Break down what's actually in the NPRM, what it means for you, highlight some of the biggest risks and that we see where rules as written could unintentionally slow down innovation, exclude smaller operators, hinder public safety, and really affect, I think, a lot of the safe and effective BVLOS flights that have been happening for the last few years. And that's at risk, right? So we're going to discuss that as an industry. How can we provide constructive feedback that makes BVLOS workable for all operators? And I'm excited to be here with Dave and Joshua to dive into this. So by the end of today, we're looking to have a clearer sense of what Aloft's comments are going to be, and hopefully inform you to help formulate your comments as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we truly start this dive. The chat section of Zoom is open, as well as the Q&A section is open as well. You all do have the ability to raise your hands for comment and for discussion. Again, this is meant to be an open forum feedback discussion as we move forward. Obviously, with 500 attendees in the webinar today, it's going to be very hard to get to everyone. But again, I will be monitoring the chat. I will also be monitoring the QA section, and we'll call out questions, comments, things that are important as we move forward. Rather than have a slide deck for us today, this is truly just going to be a general discussion, and we will also provide a recording that we'll host live shortly after this webinar concludes. And so with that, John or Dave, if you want to go ahead and kick us off, we'll get things moving here.
Yeah, I'll tee up Dave for the first one. As we were brainstorming and talking about where to begin, uh, Dave wrote down topics that have us coming out of our chairs. So that seems like a good place to start. Dave, what has you coming out of your chair?
I'll start, and recreational topics typically are put off to the end of the discussion. So if we start there, that'd be a nice difference from us. I'll be pretty brief about it. Um, I always look for a silver lining or something positive in a very large NPRM like this. I cannot find much that's positive. For recreational operators, the section 108.475 would allow us to fly 10 nautical miles. It would allow UAS of less than 55 pounds to fly, and you would have to fly within a category 3, not so completely different from operations over people categories, the new set of categories that define population density. Good news is that the recreational operators get a buy. So we on a number of things, we don't have to create a company operations, a manual. You don't need 5 hours experience. We don't have to define a base of operations. We don't need an individual who is an operations supervisor, and we don't have to create or implement a cybersecurity plan, and there is no duty and rest requirements. However, that's the end of the good news. We are required from the UAS and associated elements that we have to be compliant with standard remote ID. So it's very difficult to create your own DIY recreational aircraft and fly Part 108. The aircraft must be fully autonomous. So we're not flying this ourselves from a set of joysticks. We have to provide strategic deconfliction and conformance monitoring. We probably do that by buying the service from an ADSP, automated data protected service provider or data service provider. And the UAS must be able to continue. This one I enjoy. The UAS has to be able to continue to fly and receive command and control after being struck by lightning. That's section 108.895. From the operator, we need to have all the operator capabilities. The flight supervisor, we have to report incidents, and we have to do record keeping per 108.40 and reporting for 108.45. Those requirements are monumental, and so those are issues that are significant. So briefly, what would we propose for this? And we would suggest no reporting or record keeping for a recreational Part 108 pilot, no personnel requirements, remove the requirement to operate after a lightning strike. We're happy with a permitting exam. Would love to establish some level of competency in order to do this, and create some type of a carve out for a DIY capability. And potentially we could use the FRIAs that we help get approved through the FAA. So stepping back from that, as defined, I cannot envision a single individual taking on the variety of burdens that are articulated in the BVLOS NPRM for recreational operation 108.475. So could we, enable flight by making this a lot simpler for recreational pilots who hopefully will be the future commercial pilots. There'll be future A&P technicians, and there'll be certainly future engineers and programmers.
And just agree with what you said there, and just to build on it, I think looking at public safety, DFR operations, commercial enterprise operations, I think they're going to feel the exact same pain as recreational, maybe even more so, because they have BVLOS waivers today that are safe, effective, proven, and those will go away, effective immediately. I think high level, the two biggies that stand out for me is one, and this was in the ARC report. I think just side note on the ARC, a lot of great recommendations in there. Dave and I were part of that process. I think it's important to note, one, it's 3.5 years old, so let's make sure that we're updating it where necessary. but also recognizing some of the, I think, lasting recommendations. And the biggest recommendation was we need a rule, just like 107, just like 44809. What's a framework that allows me to fly without going to the FAA? And the whole idea was let's get rid of waivers. The problem is this NPRM is basically another waiver process, right? You need to get your aircraft approved. You need to get your operation approved. You need to get your area of operation approved. Sounds like a BVLOS waiver to me, right? There's no, hey, I'm following these rules and I'm good to go, right? I think even if we had reporting, other things in there, that would be fine if we could fly by rule, right? So that's my biggie is that this is still a waiver process, just in another form, another name, and effectively, very difficult to comply with. Number two would be this is really, I think, written from the mindset of a vertically integrated delivery operation, by which I mean you are making the aircraft that you're flying and operating it to do deliveries, right? Those are fully autonomous. Um, the reporting, the aircraft, all of that that goes with it is great if you're Google, if you're Zipline. Aside from that sort of vertically integrated delivery operation, there aren't too many BVLOS operations that will operate that way. And I think the biggest part that you kind of need to give credit, it's like it's fantastic to see the FAA embracing autonomy, but they've required fully autonomous, as they've said. And when we look at a lot of the BVLOS operations that we support today, whether that's inspection, DFR, public safety, it's usually a mix, right? And so you might get a 911 call, for example, send a drone autonomously to that location, and then take over, right? That's when you take over the controls. I think power line, utility type inspections, very similar, right? It might be 90% autonomous, but you might need to get in there and do some work with the good old thumbs, right? That isn't allowed. And I think when you put that together and kind of reframe it as Dave was talking about, really hard to think about an operation that is happening today, taking delivery out of the picture, an operation that's happening today that you could actually do, right? We can get into the weeds from there, but those are my two biggies.
Yeah. And for those of you that know me on the call, I come from the public safety space. So to put a public safety spin on this, if we look at the current BVLOS operations under Part 107, I'll hit on and throw some love to Pearland Police Department. They were the first agency in the country to get a true BVLOS DFR waiver. It was a 2-year process, and we've just finally gotten some guidelines for other agencies to follow suit. And now with these the proposed ruling, that all goes away. And as it's written, there is no way for these people to be grandfathered in or to get some sort of, waiver to bring what they did in Part 107 under Part 108. And then we start looking at the costs that could be associated with this proposed verbiage. It's going to kind of create the haves and have-nots in the public safety DFR space, which we already see where state and federal agencies have much larger budgets to go after these types of operations, and small to medium-sized municipalities are kind of left in the dust. This doesn't really carve out a section for all the work that has already been done specifically in the DFR space. And like John said, DFR is not completely automated. Yes, the drone's going to take off from the dock or from the roof, go to the location, but there is going to be somebody manually operating the drone, putting it in a place where it needs to be to capture the data needed for DFR programs to be successful. I'm just looking at one of the calls here. No one's discussing the economic burden of these proposed regs. I think that's one we could definitely spin off and have a long discussion on as well. But I'll continue to chime in here with kind of the public safety spin and my opinions here.
Yeah, from the economic impact is a great question. And so as Joshua was just pointing out, if you're flying with either in public safety or in commercially with a Part 107 beyond visual line of sight waiver today, the moment the Part 108 rule goes into effect, those waivers are terminated. So in my interaction with folks who have businesses or their business is based on a waiver based on flying drones, I don't think they're going to continue to just fly and fly illegally. They're going to try to be compliant. So this, shutting down or at least diminishing thousands and thousands of Part 107 businesses is a definite financial impact. From the recreational standpoint, we've got 1.5 million recreational UAS operators in the United States. So envision for a moment that we've annoyed all of the young people. The median age of recreational is in the low 20s. So we've annoyed kids, we've annoyed young adults to the point where they say, the heck with this, this is getting too complicated. So did we just turn away people who could be future pilots, future technicians, future engineers and programmers? So the lost opportunity on that is a staggering number when you think that we're starting with a base of 1.5 recreational operators. It's a great question. I'd like to, Josh, if I can, I'd like to segue to the other big one for me, which is Part 146. If you want to get to that later, I'll be happy to be quiet.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was gonna chime in on a couple things before we get into some of the details. I saw a good comment about different types of deliveries. So, let me qualify that. Really what I was thinking about was the burrito delivery, if you will, right? It's going, to a known location, right? You're dropping off something from Walmart, effectively. There was a good comment about search and rescue delivery, right? Emergency medical deliveries, right? Those are not going to be fully autonomous, right? We've all seen cool videos of like dropping the life jacket to someone in a river. That's not going to be fully autonomous, right? You're going to get to the river and then you're going to have to navigate, right? I think when you think about medical emergencies, ADs, blood, life-saving equipment, whatever it may be, you're going to see that mix of autonomous, 90%, but then take over. And so I think that carve out of recognizing that you're going to have autonomy, but not complete autonomy is a big one for search and rescue type stuff. So it's a great comment there.
Yeah, and just a little anecdotal thing here. Automated delivery is definitely not foolproof yet. There was a video that came out just a couple weeks ago from the West Coast where a delivery drone plunked somebody's package in their pool. So we're not quite there at this full 100% autonomy. Will we get there? I'm sure we will, but it's not foolproof yet. And so to try and take all of these different use cases, all of these different verticals within our industry and force them into autonomy for BVLOS operations, I think is a huge mistake and just a massive oversight, and clear that they were not speaking to the 500 plus attendees we have on this webinar who understand that the language, the verbiage has to change.
Yeah, and just to close on that before we go on to other topics, I think there's we have a rich history of BVLOS 107 waivers to date. I think too much of the focus of the NPRM has really been on key site delivery type operations, not the thousands of other BVLOS operations that are happening, some of which are, the stuff that gets us excited, which is the boring BVLOS, right? It's flying to the other side of a tank where you can't see the drone, but you're still close to it, or having a dock in a remote location that you're going to take off and still maybe use your thumbs. And I think the other part that's missing when it comes to autonomy is there might be operations that still like to use eyeballs as a safety mitigation, right? There's plenty of reasons why thumbs and eyeballs should still be effective in a BVLOS 108 world, and that piece is missing. So with that, and I'll kind of tee up the 146 UTM bucket. And it kind of ties into the rest of the rule, right? When you start to look at the different pieces, if you remove something, it kind of starts to fall apart. And I think the UTM piece, which ties into the fully autonomous aspect, ties into the aircraft requirements, ties into the population density requirements, it really starts to get pretty brittle when you look at what is effectively going on here to create safety. And I'll start with, my soapbox, as many of you know, has always been population density. The FAA, this is on their official data site. It kind of ties into the Landscan population density data. Love the idea of having a data set, a map that we can look at to see what's required. I think the problem is, and this is evident in the map, is that pretty much any town, regardless of size, say for like Manhattan type locations, it's pretty much the same. There are locations where a town of less than 1,000 people has the same density as a town of 500,000 people, right? It's just because if you're not truly condensed like a Manhattan like scenario, you have roughly the same density, and the risks are not the same. The problem with relying on that data and kind of the way they've scored it is that if you're flying pretty much anywhere over a town of greater than 100 people, you're going to be required to have UTM services, right? That has effects in terms of the type of drone you can use. Can't use radio frequencies, which means basically, if you're going to fly BVLOS, you need an entirely new drone that doesn't exist today. So how long is it going to take manufacturers to get caught up with that? If you're, sorry, Wing and Zipline, I'll just continue to pick on you. They can probably move a lot faster to do that. Is it realistic for drones that are flying BVLOS today to not be enough to fly under Part 108? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. Dave, I'll let you go further
Thank,
on 146.
thank you, John, that I've been able to jot down some notes and uh, hopefully organize my thoughts on this. Before I started FPV Freedom Coalition with Josh Cook and Dan Oakes, I worked for 38 and a half years at IBM. Worked in a multitude of organizations, and so I have a pretty good understanding of large distributed enterprise information systems capabilities. And the Part 146 has written in the NPRM. It's all about unmanned traffic management. It's essentially, in my words, a request for quote. There's no requirements. There's no performance. The FAA tries to put forward performance requirements, and that's fine, but there are almost none in the document. And what they do focus on in the over 100 pages that they devote to Part 146 is they talk a lot about development processes and procurement processes and quality control. Unfortunately, what they're describing and what they're requiring is 25 to 30 years out of date. So I checked myself in as much as I've been retired for a bit, and I asked some of my colleagues, am I off base? Am I wrong? And their response was, this will not work. If the FAA tries to implement this NPRM, it will not function. So not get off the ground. So why don't we use state-of-the-art development practices if we're launching a new capability? So what's also really curious, and so I was whining and complaining, and John said, well, no, Dave, how about looking at the various key sites that are going on? And so that's a good thought. So the FAA has been working with NASA and a number of companies, Google Wing, Zipline, other package delivery firms, as well as public safety, and they have used largely an ASTM standard on UTM, and they've come up with implementations that have been working. They are single instances. And so forever, the notion from the FAA is we're going to have industry run this. Industry's going to write it. Industry's going to create the standard first, then design it, then create the means of compliance, and then manage it. And then FAA will provide oversight as appropriate. So the NPRM only in passing talks about the ASTM work, over 10 years done by NASA. RCTA, another international standards body, is also involved. So they, in the back of the of Part 146, there's then a reference that in the future we will be issuing 2 advisory circulars, and in those will be the requirements for strategic deconfliction and conformance monitoring. So trying to unpack what that means is strategic deconfliction is all about DAA, detect and avoid. But we're now talking about a 3-dimensional space, and it's a 3-dimensional space over time. So if you're into solid modeling and you think about, well, if I have 2 objects, do they interfere? And that's the math we can do today. Well, now you think about 2 flight paths in space on a time base. Now calculate the interference fit of those. The FAA wants that done in real time. That's a tall order. It's not done anywhere, to my knowledge, today, certainly not being done in manned aircraft. Conformance monitoring, then, is the monitoring of all aircraft along the flight path in the space and real-time reporting that back to the home base. A big piece of this is that notion that, okay, if you look at the ASTM standard and they're using CockroachDB, so it's an open source database distributed, this can work, but you need a single instantiation of a central database in order to manage this across the entire country. That's nowhere are they talking about any rules or regs or anything that says, yeah, we'll have a single. Instead, the NPRM says what we'll likely do is hand off just the data. There will be APIs or application programming interfaces. So I apologize if this is a little MIGO, a little too geeky, but I'm happy that we've got the background to put forward the comments on this. Anyone listening who is also in software development, we implore you to look at our comments on FPV Freedom Coalition website, as well as the Aloft comments, and refine this and get some sensible recommendations. Our recommendation is that the FAA take a more proactive approach, create a central model that will be used, because the NPRM states that it's okay if everyone has their own separate code base. We're going to create interoperability simply by sharing the data. We just cannot see how that works, and it also seems to be antithetical to the philosophy of the ASTM standard. So, yeah, it's in addition, there is also a different process that the FAA is contemplating on how to create the standard and then get it approved. I should note that and this is my personal view, is that I would estimate that I do not see a fully fledged BVLOS system in place before 10 years from now, based, if we were trying to work it with this NPRM, largely because Part 146 would probably have to be restarted if we're going to architect it as per the NPRM. So apologies for being that negative, but that's our analysis at this point on Part 146.
So there's been a couple consistent questions about what's good about the NPRM. How do we kind of look at where to start? And I guess the way I would frame it is that I think if you look at what's in the NPRM and you apply it to commercial drone delivery, wonderful, right? We just need to say, all right, what's something that reflects today's BVLOS operations, right? And they kind of jumped ahead to fully autonomous UTM deconfliction type stuff that is fine for delivery, but is overkill and really not safety justified for other types of BVLOS operations. So I think they've kind of gone all the way to the end and forgot about kind of the spectrum of BVLOS. As I've talked to some utility companies, they deploy way more drones today, BVLOS, than would be allowed under Part 108, right? So you're still, it's still like too advanced, but also not scaled enough for what operators today have waivers and the ability to fly for. So I think to me, that's the good part of the NPRM is if your delivery, right, it's pretty good. It just doesn't reflect the full spectrum of BVLOS. I think another good question that I saw was how does this relate to EASA and what's going on in Europe? Yeah, for Aloft, we've been focused on airspace fleet management in the US, been a LANS provider since 2018. We're going through EASA certification now for USpace. I think USpace EASA has, I think, similar kind of vagueness that this has and some of the stuff that Dave just talked about, because in both the FAA and EASA scenarios, there's no central UTM, there's no central database, right? And so it's kind of, I think, implied that various providers, networks come together, share APIs. Those are kind of theoretical, right? As you get USpace approval, you're probably the only one, so you're not interacting with anybody, right? So I think that lack of central element is a key missing part. And I think in the FAA, in the NPRM, the FAA recognized that, hey, we can't build and operate this. I think looking at Lance as the most relevant example, I think certainly it's not ideal that the way they operate that, but it's necessary, right? There needs to be a central place that you go to. Sure, there's downtime, sure there's bugs, sure there's things to work out that I think probably drive us a little mad at times, from a Lance perspective, but it's good to have that central system, right? You know who you connect to, you know who you're getting authorization for. And so I think EASA, USpace, and now Part 108, they're both lacking that central authority. And I think that is just problematic when you think about requiring those kind of services over towns of 1,000 people.
Yeah, what works for the delivery firms does not necessarily work for inspections folks, for critical infrastructure folks, definitely not for public safety, where we know a one size fits all model does not and will never work. So, a couple suggestions I've seen in the chat is carving out individual BVLOS, rules for how delivery works, for how critical infrastructure and utility companies utilize BVLOS operations. And the same goes for public safety because not all BVLOS operations in public safety are necessarily DFR. So perhaps carving out, individual sections for each vertical or each type of operation may be beneficial as well. Scrolling back through, we've got a lot of comments here, guys. We'll do our best to keep up here.
On the point of one size fits all, and this is a phrase that it was so great to work with Houston Mills in the AC and DAC. He chaired the AC and DAC for a number of years, and he was adamant that we need to create a set of regulations across UAS that are appropriate with the level of risk. And so smaller, if it's not going to fly as far, less regulation. And this is an NPRM that is explicitly one size fits all. And so if I may briefly just enumerate the reporting and record keeping requirements that pretty much everyone who flies Part 108 will be required for it. So if you have not dug into 108.45 and 108.40, reporting is 45 and record keeping 40. So in order to fly Part 108, flight data to the FAA and the manufacturer. Interruption report. All unplanned landings have to be reported. Any UA momentary failure. So if you have a momentary failure in C2, you have to report that. You have to identify all parts that have failed in the system and identify an appropriate or the cause that you think caused the failure. You have to report any automated data service provider failures. So you have to buy this service, and then if there's an outage, you're required to report the outage to the FAA. You have to report all security breaches where the operator loses control. You have to report all damage of property greater than $500. They explicitly say that this is different from the requirement for Part 107. It doesn't seem different, so that means it'd be a redundant report. And for all of these reports, registration zero. For record keeping, total time in service, status of life-limited parts, records for each flight, time, date, duration, registration type, operation, individual flight paths, origin, destination, altitudes, names of operation personnel, and landing locations. Did you notice in there individual flight paths? So we have to record the flight path, and part of the conformance monitoring is real-time comparison of the flight path, the planned flight path versus the actual flight path. Other record keeping, mechanical irregularities, and finally maintenance, a description of work performed, date of work, ID, personal. So that's a list of reporting and record keeping. So when I say I don't think any recreational operator would be able to do this, I would also say a small business or a mid-sized business would be stressed to try to do this type of record keeping and reporting.
And this is probably one area where Dave and I will disagree a little bit. I think to some extent, if you're flying BVLOS, there should be more responsibility, more accountability that goes with it. But it's also not clear why some of this data would be necessary in the first place, right? You look at a pilot's logbook who's going to fly you on Delta later, it's I took off here and I landed here, right? It's one line in pen. How does this compare? It gets a little crazy. And I think probably the piece that I have more issues with is not the operator reporting, but the manufacturer reporting. And again, that's not an issue if you make the drone you're flying. But if you're not, and we've already gone through this with DJI and all the China stuff, but now this would effectively mean that they would require DJI to keep and submit those records for you, right? So, that's where it gets even more tangled in terms of OEM manufacturer requirements. And so I think it's, possible and not terrible from an operator perspective, but it gets really muddy when you throw in the OEM requirements and you think about how do you fly a mixed fleet, right? I think a lot of Aloft customers and use cases we see today have varied fleets, and it gets really hard if you're relying on different manufacturers for different use cases, which makes sense operationally, but becomes really burdensome from a reporting and compliance perspective.
We should also touch on the airworthiness acceptance. And so if you've worked with the FAA on a new aircraft and you're familiar with type cert approvals, it's extraordinarily difficult to get a type cert approval for a new aircraft, whether it's a manned aircraft or a UAS. And so they've come up with a new approach. And this new approach, like pretty much everything else in the NPRM, is, in my words, an abdication of responsibility by the FAA where the authority is delegated to industry. And so industry is expected to come up with a set of standards, and then that standard becomes a means of compliance. And then if you are going to create an aircraft, you have to then get a declaration of compliance. And so the FAA's role is oversight. So my anxiety with the airworthiness is that this really is it does appear to have a significant conflict of interest because the companies creating the means of compliance should be, likely are, going to be the same people who are going to build the aircraft as the folks who are going to build the standard. And then the FAA will be a third party from an oversight perspective. However, we have not seen great results with this type of process, whether it's in something like the remote ID aircraft, where the review is a cursory review of the declaration of compliance application. So this is an area that, in my view, it could work, but it is delegated to industry, and the process makes me very anxious from a perspective of running it. It is largely delegated to industry as well.
Yep. Just to address the chat again, it's an overwhelming theme here on the economic impact, the huge economic impact that this will have on the individual service providers, the smaller firms, whether that's engineering or land surveying firms, some of the smaller inspection groups, and even potentially public safety could be priced out of their ability to do this. We already see, costs just continue to go up on airframes, especially as we move to a more U.S. focused market. What does this do for these? How do we speak up as small drone service providers, as individual pilots who are making a living under Part 107 operations? Why are they left out in the cold?
And maybe just to take a slightly different stance on that, I think I agree with the economic concern. I think I would just kind of place it in a different area. I think starting with aircraft, for example, there's no reason that drones you're flying today, whether that's DJI, Skydio, drone in a box, whatever, there's no reason that those same drones you're flying today, you couldn't fly in February, plus or minus 12 months, whenever this final rule drops, that you shouldn't be able to fly those anymore, right? The ability to have radio control over populated areas seems like an unfounded risk that they've kind of put in there. So there's no reason to have to require new aircraft, right? But I think the disconnect comes in where you have onerous requirements that don't really tie back to safety. And I think that's where there's issue. And I don't want to go off topic too much, but just another thought that came to mind. I think people are asking what's good, what's positive in this. I think one of the things that does help the drone operator is the idea of right away, which becomes a little more drone friendly. Still I think isn't quite clear, but we're starting to get to a more I think connected airspace where drones, if you can see another aircraft, you mitigate against that, right? But if something isn't broadcasting, you're not required to go against that. So I think that's one of the positives that is in here. And I think just another example where there's going to be a lot of comments from whether it's general aviation, helicopters that are going to be against that piece of it, because they want to essentially be below 400 feet and not broadcast and still have the right of way. And I think that part is a good win for drone folks in this.
One of the recurring comments is, in the chat, is that this looks like doom and gloom for drones. To be clear, with the exception of the beyond visual line of sight waivers, the Part 107 waivers that will be terminated, we envision Part 107 continuing on as is, as well as the recreational exception 44809. So we continue to see 107, 108, and 44809. We also were proposing the notion of maybe there's something in between here where there's a diluted beyond visual line of sight that becomes a augmentation of Part 107. And so to John's point when we opened the discussion that, most people who are flying missions who are doing some beyond visual line of sight, it's a hybrid operation. Some of it's autonomous, some of it's not. Maybe it's not, fully autonomous in the definition of Part 108, but it's an automated path or flight path that's being guided by the aircraft that's been planned beforehand. So we're proposing that, and I just want to say that, yeah, again, Part 107, we anticipate will continue, and recreational will continue. Why are we getting so wired then about this NPRM? Because we do feel, as John introduced this, that this opens up a whole new area in the NAS and allows more innovation. And we don't want to see big chunks of current fleets and individuals not able to participate in this and see the benefit of it as well as innovate in this space.
Yeah, completely agree. And I like the idea of a diluted section, if you will, because one thing that is completely missing currently from this NPRM is shielded operations as well as EVLOS. So the use of electronic means to maintain line of sight. Something that definitely needs to be, considered and called out as we move this forward.
Yeah, and I think that's where, as from the law perspective, again, we deal with a ton of government, enterprise, recreational users. We've been trying to engage with all folks to get their feedback, and I think there's something in between 107 as it is today and the waiver system and Part 108 as it's proposed, and whether we expand 108 to say, hey, it's not just autonomous, vertically integrated delivery operations. There's a whole lot into it. Or we look at 107 and say, hey, this waiver is working pretty well for specific types of operations. We've been approving those to date. It kind of seems silly to say they're no longer able to operate in that fashion. So whether we keep 107 with waivers or move 108 to include that 107 waiver type operation, I think that's really a key part that we'll be fighting for in this, is to recognize that there's a spectrum of BVLOS. I mean, you look at risk, and we really went into great detail about this in the ARC report. Risk is not just about severity, but it's about probability as well, right? You can measure what happens to a drone when it flies into your head, but you also need to factor in how likely is it that it's going to hit your head in the first place, and put those two numbers together, right? And so when you look at the different safety mitigations, what seems to be required in Part 108, and the fact that it's not required in Part 107 BVLOS waivers today shows you that we need to still maintain that ability to fly, where there's safety, there's compliance, there's accountability, and there's life-saving missions that happen because of that. There's truly economical missions that happen because of it. Storm response, you think about some of these use cases that are absolutely critical for state DOTs, for utility companies, for public safety. It's not workable, it's not feasible in the 108 paradigm as it's proposed. So we need to keep that ability that says, hey, you may not be flying a particular drone type, but what you have today, keep going, right? There's no reason to stop the flight that's already been approved while we continue to make progress on these other areas.
Yeah. To hit on that, there's been a couple questions in the chat on when is Part 108 supposed to go into effect. So the FAA has released this NPRM on August 5th. There will be this comment period until October 6th. We hope to see a final rule sometime in 2025, and then it's typically 6 to 12 months before that would go into effect is kind of the timeline that is most common.
And so then I would layer on that, if I may. So I've led a lot of, very large projects. And so there are huge software development projects and a complete rework of hardware. And there's a fair amount of invention required that's inside this BVLOS NPRM. That's where I come up with 10 years. So the rule could go into effect just as Joshua said, approximately, roughly a year from now. Maybe it's 24 months from now. I assert that it will take another 8 to 10 years. I mention this not to be an alarmist, but to underscore how important it is that we have to have some type of grandfathering, some type of exception on Part 107 BVLOS waivers until the Part 108 and Part 146 are operational.
Completely agree.
And even beyond that, right? Because 108 is effectively another waiver system, let's not get rid of the 107 waivers as we have them today, right? And I think timing is a big factor, especially because it's written that all of those waivers effectively end once this is finalized, right? So that could be, I think in the initial press conference, they talked about January, February, right? We could have a final rule that goes into effect then. Maybe it takes a while to come into effect, but theoretically that could be as soon as today's 107 waivers are invalidated. So it could be sooner while manufacturers work on drones that can work and all these other things come to be. So timing is a factor, but so too is as Josh has moved slides here, so too are comments. So
Yeah. So, as
yeah.
we get down into the last few minutes here of the webinar, a lot of people have been asking, how do I get involved? How do I comment? So we have less than 40 days to provide comment. There's some steps there, regulations.gov. You can search for docket FAA-2025-1908, or you can also just search BVLOS. You'll select the NPRM and click comment. Our friends over at the Commercial Drone Alliance have kind of formulated, put this slide together for how to make your comments most impactful. Again, we'll have a recording up at the end of the once we get through with this webinar. But again, the standing, the impact, and the solution, all of which will be important. As of yesterday, I think there were only 75, 76 comments that had been made on regulations.gov. So it's imperative now more than ever to get out and get your voice heard on this. And just
Josh,
go ahead.
if I could add to this, it's really important to put in your own words. And so this
Yes.
is not a time for copy and paste. If we were asking you to contact congressional representatives and senators, copy and paste works perfectly, not with an NPRM. And so the bullet points that Josh just had on the screen, have it be impactful. Talk about the benefit or impact that this has on you personally is great. And in the recreational space, we always suggest to folks be professional, be polite, be constructive as well.
And I think in prior rulemaking with remote ID or other aspects, I think copy and paste was definitely a concern, right? We're now in the age of ChatGPT or whatever your favorite AI is. There's no reason not to put together really effective comments, right? So I think the two things, that we hope you take away from this is one, how do you inform your comments for your operations, for your company, for your agency, and do that. Use all the resources, throw it in a ChatGPT. You won't have to worry about the copy and paste, right? That's no longer an issue. And then two, as Josh has up on the screen, you can contact Aloft. If you're no one of us directly, feel free to reach out. This is a catch-all email. We're really looking to synthesize all of the feedback that we're getting from our recreational constituents, commercial, enterprise, government, public safety. We'll be putting together a collective resource. We're working with other organizations and folks to have other kind of collaborative elements. So our plan is to kind of publish that draft, let people see it, let people know what we're planning to produce. We'll make that all public as we go along. But I think let us know if there's questions you have, topics that you really think are worthwhile. I think just from the chat and this webinar, we have, I think, probably 10 key things that we really want to focus on already. So this was great. Thank you for that. And we've got about a month to, for all of us to really share our thoughts, why it impacts us, and some validation around why we think that.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you all so much for participating in the discussion. I saw a question about large stakeholders that you can reach out to. I've got a few of them up on the screen here. The Drone Service Providers Alliance, obviously the FPV Freedom Coalition, the Drone Advisory Council, Pilot Institute, the Commercial Drone Alliance, obviously us here at Aloft. We will do our best to unify and amplify the industry voice to get some changes to this NPRM before we have a true Part 108 rule. I want to just quickly thank everybody for joining in today. We were at 500 attendees for most of the time. We had people that were unable to get in. Just love to see the overwhelming turnout here. It's been great. We will post a recording live on our LinkedIn and social channels a little bit later today. And also, thanks to David for joining us. John, thank you for participating. I think this has been a great discussion, and hopefully we've ignited a fire under some of you to go make your voices heard.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David. Thanks, Joshua. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks all. Fly safe.